Hi, this is Scott from the Waterwise Community Center, and today we're here to talk about seasonal care and pruning for this wild but beautiful shrub right here, which is California bush sunflower, sometimes also called coastal sunflower, botanical name Encilia californica. And this is a lovely shrub to have in the garden. It is actually a little bit more adapted on most sites to slightly more coastal gardens than this situation, but it does grow in limited areas inland. And although in most cases I would default to using its botanical cousin, brittlebush, Encilia farinosa, which is a little bit more adapted to the inland situations, there are plenty of situations in which I might choose to use this for a spot or two in the garden instead. One of the main reasons is because it has this beautiful dark green foliage. And so in gardens where aesthetics are a primary driver or a concern, there are so many beautiful silvery to gray California native species that using too many of them together, like the brittlebush right next to the white sage, which is just out of frame over here, kind of robs some of that color impact. And so this could be really nice to mix in, for example, in a lightly irrigated garden next to a white sage with lots of beautiful spring blooms, kind of yellow daisy flowers that are adored by pollinators, really important birdseed afterward, butterflies like the bloom, so many of good reasons. But it is a kind of wild shrub. And so even though it looks kind of like a loose shrub here, if you look further in, you'll see that it's actually starting to get quite bare and leggy on the inside. And what happens in kind of a irrigated every 3 or 4 weeks garden situation in our inland gardens is that the shrub kind of slowly grows more and more and more. It'll get 6 feet wide, 7 feet wide, sometimes even wider. And over a few years, sometimes there's just, if it's not pruned at all, just kind of foliage, leaves at the end, but it's very bare on the inside. And once it's gotten to that state, it can actually be kind of hard to prune and reinvigorate kind of extreme. And get it to respond nicely. Sometimes that can happen, but if you're keeping an eye on it every year or every couple of years, it's nice in the fall, early winter to do anywhere in between a light to a significant cutback, but not cutting it all the way to the ground. And that will give it plenty of time through the cool season to put on lush, nice growth and prepare itself for beautiful spring blooms again. And so that's exactly what we are going to show today. For much more information about California bush sunflower and its cousin brittlebush, be sure to check out our Waterwise Garden Planner website. Our goal for this pruning is going to be size reduction and reinvigoration for some beautiful, beautiful growth. And so the first question that comes up is when you're making your pruning cuts, how hard or how far back do you cut along each stem? And with California bush sunflower, you really have a variety of options. If for some reason you just want to do a light cut, if it's looking pretty vigorous throughout the whole stem, that's just fine. And you will notice that because we've had some recent warm weather, even though it is December, it's actually setting up for a small amount of bloom. And so that's a decision-making point. We could let it get a few blooms, but most of our native pollinators are actually dormant this time of year. The butterflies would appreciate them. But if we do that, we're going to set back our pruning and we're going to set back that reinvigoration, which is going to give us far more blooms in the spring. So I'm going to choose to sacrifice these blooms. If this was kind of very vigorous along here, maybe first year you just wanted to make it a little bushier, you could do some light cuts like that. But what I am going to do is, because this is so leggy, I really want to make sure that I'm going to be cultivating that dense bushy form over time. That does a few things. It looks nicer for the humans in the garden. That dense bushier form is partially due to the fact that there's going to be more individual branches, which at the end of those branch tips means more flowers for the pollinators and butterflies. And also that density provides better shelter for birds and lizards throughout the year. And so there's multiple benefits to cutting it back harder, especially in the first few years, and really keeping that dense bushy form. And so when you're making your cuts, for example, along this stem, I would actually cut it back quite far here or maybe even farther back in order to encourage additional branching, additional density. Now, if you look closely, this will give us an indication for where to cut. And at the time of your cutting, you may or may not see the new growth that you can see in these nodes along the stem. But even if you don't see that, you can notice the node where it's not pushing new growth yet, it's a kind of swollen area. And it's where if a pruning cut is made, the hormones shifting around inside the plant in response to that cut are going to make leaves break out in the vast majority of situations. And so, although we might be going quickly once we get going, the ideal location to make a pruning cut is going to be just maybe about 1/4 of an inch or so right above one of those nodes. And that's really going to stimulate growth to get going very quickly. It won't leave a long kind of stub at the end to kind of die back and have a hard time healing over. And so you might go something like that. And if you do that, you can just kind of quickly go through. When we talk about pruning trees or large shrubs that are kind of long-term woody and have a sculptural form, we talk about really pruning above a node that is going to force the growth outward in the direction that that bud is going to break or that new kind of branch is going to grow. But with dense shrubs, we don't slow down to take the time to do that in the vast majority of situations. That density can be stimulated by kind of growth in every direction. But if we just do that here, you can notice that there's still quite a bit of legginess with how woody this is. And so I'm actually going to go down further on this, and this is going to look like an extreme cut, but it should respond very well to where you can see again these nodes. And because there's some growth lower down, I'm pretty confident that these buds are going to break just fine. And so I might even take this down all the way to here to really reinvigorate the bushiness of the plant. So look at how much I took back. Some plants are going to respond very well to this kind of cutting, and if it's done in the fall, early winter, this is one of them. Some plants are not going to want to be cut this hard. They don't necessarily get stimulated to grow a lot more. And so it's important to know that. We have the information for all of the common native and water-wise plants you might grow in a Southern California garden on our Water-Wise Garden Planner website. If we're missing something and you want to know more about it, get in touch with us, leave a comment, and we will try to add a profile. So this is going to go into our green waste pile, or even better yet, if you have a small electric chipper, you can let that dry out just a little bit and return it as natural mulch into your own landscape. So with that, we are going to reset the camera, and we will take a look as we'll show you just kind of generally how to do a quick cutback that's not going to take you all day to accomplish and will achieve your care goals for this California bush sunflower. So now we're going to take on really going into pruning back the entire plant for the season. Now, when I'm done with this, it's going to look like a pretty harsh cut, but we're going to document how it's going to grow back, and you will see that it is really going to make for a much nicer plant in the long term. I was just informed that I need to be in a meeting in 8 minutes, and so this will be an example of how do you do this without taking all day to labor over each individual cut, which is what you should want to do to get your work done efficiently, still in a pleasurable way. The first thing whenever you're pruning, and if you've watched our other videos, you will have heard me see this again, number one thing to keep in mind, especially if you're kind of increasing your pace as you're efficiently doing your work, is always know where your other hand is, because you don't want to be going so quick that you're going to lose the tip of your finger. I've known it happen to a number of really great horticulturalists. Always stay mindful of where your hands are. But with that, you just kind of start going into it, and you're aiming for where you want to roughly do your cutbacks. You can get going. One thing I always like to do is be gathering as I go with each individual cut. So that way it's very efficient in terms of motion. And if you have a sheet of burlap or a green waste bin nearby, it makes cleanup much quicker as well. So one thing you can notice now is that as I started pruning and getting closer to the base of the plant, there is already starting all of this real young, vigorous upward growth. Some of it should be doing quite a bit better once it has better air circulation. But when I see this vigorous growth, I'm kind of going to leave this in most cases as some of that replacement growth that's first going to grow in and look really nice. If there's individuals that are kind of really long and starting to look leggy, I might cut it back by a third or a half, just again to kind of help its bushiness. And then often, again, I will just leave it. It also opens it up and lets us know that we have some weeding to do later on today. So now that I'm almost done, I'll always take a quick step back, take a look at it, and see if it achieved what I was hoping for. And so pretty much, yeah, and you will see this is proper hard reinvigoration pruning of California bush sunflower. And so if that's a look that you're not going to want to deal with even for a brief period of time, and you still want to grow the plant, then maybe it's one not to have front and center in your landscape, or it's one to have with plants that often don't get that extreme of a cutback to kind of keep a balanced look, or you might kind of stagger your pruning. And so this is going to kind of create that reinvigorated, dense, bushy growth that I'm looking for. I'm just going to jump back in and do a couple of more pruning cuts, really related to things that now that I'm seeing them open are just going to kind of create growth, maybe not in an area that I'm looking for, or here there's just a lot of maybe excessive density growing along the ground, and I'm just going to release some of that growth. There's still going to be plenty of great stuff going on here. This branch I'm seeing looks dead, just sometimes natural. A few dead branches. Obviously lots of weeding to do right here. And then just on this back side, it's not necessarily a problem for it to be taller, but maybe just an aesthetic sort of thing. I'm just going to cut back this woody, real tall part just a little bit more, kind of even that out just a tad. And we'll check back in as it starts to regrow, but for today, I think we'll call this good. So before we go, I realized I wanted to show you one more thing, which is when you are pruning back a shrub that wants a hard cutback, not necessarily cut all the way to the ground, but a hard reinvigorating pruning, you might be removing over half. In this case, I'd estimate, maybe 2/3 of the bulk of the plant. And that is just fine. Just following guiding principles of understanding which plants want a hard cutback, cut to the ground, or just a little light shaping will really guide you. But if it is a hard cutback, you are going to be removing a whole lot of material, and that's just great and exactly what you're going for. So we're checking back in with our bush sunflower after it's been a few weeks since our pruning, and you can see the response is exactly what we were hoping for. All of this kind of bud break down here is really going to result in lots of really nice bushy growth, and because we're going to have so many more stems kind of farther down than we otherwise would have, when it comes around to bloom time, we're going to be rewarded with many more blooms to support many more pollinators and then many more birds as the seeds develop. So if you found this video helpful, please remember to like this video in order to help other people find it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for all of our updates and upcoming content.